Stella's fingers closed around a half-crushed piece of bread before her mind had time to feel ashamed of finding it. Behind her, a kitchen door banged open. A young cook stepped out with 2 more bags, saw her crouched by the dumpster, and froze for half a second before setting the bags down without a word and going back inside. He didn't call security. He didn't yell. He just left the door open a crack longer than necessary. Stella had learned to notice things like that. A door left open. A guard who looked away. A stranger who paid for 2 coffees and only drank 1. Small kindnesses, offered sideways, so no one had to admit they'd seen a woman digging through garbage at 11 at night. She wrapped the bread in a plastic bag she kept folded in her coat pocket and tucked it away without eating it. Tomorrow's breakfast. Tonight she had enough. Steam curled up from a grate a few feet away, the only warmth on the whole street. She stood near it a moment longer than she needed to, letting it work into her fingers before she had to walk again. A car idled across the street. Black, low, engine barely making a sound. She'd seen cars like that her whole life, first as a woman who rode in the back of one, and now as a woman who crossed the street to avoid them. She didn't look at it. Looking made men curious, but the back door of the car opened anyway. A man stepped out, tall, coat still buttoned despite the late hour, phone still in his hand as if he'd forgotten he was holding it. He looked at her the way people look at something they're trying to convince themselves they're not seeing. Stella's whole body went still. She knew that posture. She knew the exact way his jaw tightened before he said anything, because she had memorized it once, a long time ago, back when that jaw used to soften whenever he looked at her. Duck Young. The bag of food slipped from her hand and hit the pavement. For 5 years, she had built a life out of never being found. She'd changed the way she walked. She'd stopped answering to her old name in public. She had trained herself not to flinch at black cars. And in 1 second, standing in the wet light behind a restaurant, all of it collapsed. Voice cracked on the second syllable. Just enough that she heard the 5 years in it too. She ran, not toward him. Not into his arms, the way some smaller, foolish part of her had imagined for years. Late at night, hatting herself for imagining it at all. She ran the other way, into the alley, because the only thing stronger than 5 years of missing him was the fear of what would happen if he actually found her. He went after her. It wasn't a decision. His legs moved before his mind caught up, coat flapping, shoes slipping once on wet stone. His driver called out behind him, and he didn't answer. Stella, wait. She didn't wait. She knew this alley. She knew the gap between the noodle shop and the laundromat that looked too narrow for a grown man to fit through, because she'd used it a dozen times before, always at night, always alone. She was through it before he reached her. He hit the gap at full speed and stopped hard, hands braced against brick on either side, chest heaving. Too narrow. He tried anyway, shoulder first, and the stone scraped a line through his coat. By the time he forced himself sideways through, the alley on the other side was empty. No footsteps. No shadow. No sound but a stray cat knocking over a can somewhere in the dark. He stood there a long moment, breathing hard, staring at nothing. Then he looked down. The bag she'd dropped was still on the ground near the dumpster, half open. He crouched and picked it up without really deciding to. Inside, wrapped carefully in a torn plastic bag, was half a piece of bread. Not eaten. Saved. He stared at it longer than a piece of bread should ever be stared at. 5 years ago, this woman had eaten dinner off porcelain plates in a house he built for her with his own hands. Now she was saving crusts like they were something precious. Something in his chest turned over, slow and sick. He had believed for 5 years that she left him for someone else. He had told himself that story so many times it had worn smooth, like a stone in his pocket. It let him hate her instead of grieving her. Looking at the bread in his hand, the story didn't feel smooth anymore. It felt like a lie he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it was one. Stella didn't stop running until she was 3 blocks away, chest burning, breath ragged in the cold. She ducked into a narrow side street, pressed her back against a wall, and slid down until she was crouched, arms wrapped around her knees. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking, not from the cold. She hadn't let herself say his name out loud in almost a year. She'd trained her mind to skip over him the way you skip over a crack in the sidewalk, not because you forget it's there, but because looking at it too long makes you trip. He looked older, not weaker, just tired, in a way she hadn't expected from a man who once told her nothing in the world could touch him. She pressed her palms against her eyes until she saw white. Then she stood up, because standing still for too long in this city had never once been safe for her, and started walking toward the only place that still felt like it was hers. Mama Grace didn't ask questions when Stella walked in 15 minutes later. She just filled a kettle, set 2 mugs on the table, and waited. Stella sat down hard, like her legs had finally decided they were done. "I saw him," she said finally. Grace's hands stopped moving over the stove. "Duck Young," Stella nodded. Didn't trust her voice for a second. "He see you?" Grace asked, not gently, sharply. The kind of sharp that comes from real fear, not curiosity. "He saw me. He said my name." Grace set the kettle down without pouring anything. For a woman who had spent years being unshakable in front of every kind of desperate person who came through her door, she looked, for just a moment, shaken herself. "Did anyone see him see you?" Stella blinked. "What? Did anyone else see it happen?" "Anyone who might." Grace stopped herself, pressed her lips together, and turned back to the stove like she hadn't meant to say that much. "Grace." Stella's voice came out low. "What aren't you telling me?" "Drink your tea. Drunk enough of your tea to survive a war. I want an answer." Grace finally turned around, and for the first time in the 2 years Stella had known her, she looked like a woman carrying something heavy enough to break her spine if she set it down wrong. "There are people," Grace said carefully, "who have more reason than Duck Young to want you to stay disappeared. Being found by him is the least of what should scare you tonight." Stella's stomach dropped. "What people?" Grace didn't answer. She just reached across the table and held Stella's hand. The way she had the very first night Stella showed up at her door with nothing but a torn coat and a name that wasn't hers anymore. "Forgive him if you ever get the chance," Grace said quietly. "But don't you dare forget what you survived to get there." It wasn't an answer. It was worse than an answer, because it confirmed there was something to be afraid of that had nothing to do with heartbreak at all. Detective Park Jun-ho had known Duck Young for 11 years, and he had never once seen him ask for anything the way he asked for this. "Find her," Duck Young said. "Quietly. I don't want her scared any more than she already is." Park set down the folder he'd been holding. "Can I ask you something first?" "No. I'm asking anyway. Why now? It's been 5 years." Duck Young didn't answer right away. He was still holding the bag with the piece of bread in it, though he hadn't said anything about that to anyone. "She was starving, Jun-ho," he said finally. "The woman who used to run a household staff of 6 people was digging through a restaurant's trash at 11 at night, and she ran from me like I was going to hurt her." Park was quiet for a moment. "Maybe she thought you would." Duck Young's head snapped up. "I would never." "You divorced her over evidence you never let her explain," Park said, not unkindly but not softening it either. "From where she's standing, you already did the worst thing a person could do to her. Running isn't crazy, it's consistent." The words landed harder than Park probably meant them to. Duck Young sat down slowly, like something in his legs had given out. "The old file," he said. "All of it, the financial records, the witness statement, everything from the divorce." "You already saw all of that 5 years ago." "Then look again," Duck Young said. "Because I'm starting to think I didn't actually look at it the first time. I just wanted it to be true." Haijin heard about the sighting before the sun came up. She didn't react in front of anyone. That was the first rule she'd taught herself, years ago, back when she started building the version of herself that got close enough to Duck Young's world to matter in it. Never react where someone can see the shape of your fear. But alone, in her own apartment, with the door locked and the lights low, her hands weren't quite steady around her glass. 5 years. She had built 5 careful years on top of one lie, layer by layer, moving money, moving names, making sure nothing led back to her. And now the one person who could unravel all of it in a single sentence had just resurfaced in front of the one man who would actually believe her if she talked. She set the glass down harder than she meant to. If Stella talked, if Park kept digging, if Duck Young started asking the right questions instead of the comfortable ones, none of it would matter. Not the years of careful positioning, not the trust she'd built, not the quiet, patient hope that Duck Young would eventually look at her the way he used to look at his wife. She picked up her phone. "Need you to find someone," she said when the call connected. Quietly, before certain people do. A pause on the other end. "Is this business?" Haijin's eyes were dry, but her voice, when it came, had an edge sharp enough to cut. "It's personal," she said. "Which means I need it handled faster than business ever gets handled." Stella found work the next morning, the same way she found work most mornings, early, before the shift managers had time to think too hard about hearing someone whose paperwork was thinner than it should be. A restaurant 3 neighborhoods over needed someone to wash dishes. She said yes before they finished the sentence. She was elbow-deep in a sink of greasy water when she felt it. The particular stillness of being watched. She didn't turn around right away. She'd learned that lesson the hard way once. Turning around too fast made you look guilty of something, even when you weren't. When she did glance up, there was no one obviously watching. Just the usual lunch rush noise, plates clattering, someone shouting an order twice. But near the corner store across the street, later that afternoon, counting coins for the cheapest loaf of bread she could find, she felt it again. A man leaning against a lamppost who wasn't quite looking at her and wasn't quite looking away either. Her hands went cold around the coins. She paid, took the bread, and walked 3 blocks in the wrong direction before turning back toward the shelter, just to make sure no one was behind her. No one was. That should have made her feel better. It didn't. Young watched her count coins from across the street, from the backseat of a car with the windows dark enough that she'd never see him. He'd told his men to stand down before she noticed them getting too close. He wasn't ready to talk to her again, not until he had something more than an apology to offer, and right now all he had was guilt and a piece of bread he still hadn't thrown away. "Boss," his driver said carefully, "you want me to have someone cover her rent, groceries." It'd be easy to set up. She'd never even know it was. "No," driver blinked. "No." Young kept his eyes on the storefront, on the woman in a worn coat counting out change like every coin mattered because it did. "She didn't run from me because she was poor," he said quietly. "She ran because the last time I had power over her life, I used it to destroy it. If I show up now waving money at her, it's not kindness. It's the same thing all over again, me deciding what she needs instead of asking her." The driver said nothing. "Cancel it," Young said. "Whatever you were about to set up, cancel it." He almost believed in that moment that restraint was the same thing as growth. He was wrong, but it would take him longer to learn just how wrong Mama Grace's shelter had a door that stuck in humid weather, which was the only reason Young had time to knock twice before anyone answered, and the only reason Grace had time to see exactly who was standing on her doorstep before she decided what to do about it. She didn't open the door all the way. "You have some nerve," she said. "I need to talk to her." "She's not here." "Ma'am, me like you're being polite," Grace snapped, stepping fully into the doorway, blocking it with a body half his size and twice his conviction. "You want to talk to her. You had 5 years to talk to her. You had 5 years to ask her one single question before you signed papers that threw her out of her own life." Young's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. "I know," he said. "I know I failed her. That's not why I'm here." "Then why are you here?" He hesitated. It cost him something to say it out loud. "Because I think I was lied to," he said, "and I think she paid for it." Grace studied him for a long moment, long enough that he felt it. "The way you feel a doctor deciding how much bad news to give you at once. She didn't leave you for another man," Grace said finally, quiet and precise. "She left to protect you. That's all I'll tell you because the rest isn't mine to give away." Something in Young's chest cracked audibly enough that he had to look away from her for a second. "Protect me from what?" "That," Grace said. "You're going to have to earn the right to hear." She started to close the door, then stopped. "She's inside," she admitted, quieter now. "I lied about that part, but if you push your way in here to force this, you'll lose whatever chance you have left, so I suggest you wait." Stella heard every word from the hallway. She stood with her back against the wall, hand pressed flat over her own heart like she could keep it from doing something reckless, protect him. Grace had actually said it, out loud. To him, 5 years of silence cracked open in one sentence. She could have stayed hidden. Grace would have covered for her, no questions asked, the way she always did. Instead, Stella stepped into the doorway. Young saw her before Grace could stop it. His whole body went rigid, like a man trying very hard not to move too fast and scare something away. "Stella, don't," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the space between them like it was. "Don't say my name like it still means something to you. Never stopped meaning something to me. Funny." Her arms crossed over her chest, a wall built out of nothing but pride and exhaustion. "Because you signed the papers pretty fast for a man whose wife's name still meant something to him. I was wrong." "You were wrong," she repeated, and something in her laughed, but there was no humor in it at all. "You were wrong for 5 years, and you figured it out because you happened to see me digging through trash. Not because you ever once asked me. Not because you ever once picked up a phone. You believed strangers over your own wife, and now you want me to believe you've changed because you feel guilty." "Do feel guilty." "Good," she said. "You should." Silence after that was long enough to hurt. "I tried to explain once," she said finally, quieter now, the anger draining into something rower. "Do you even remember that? I came to your office. I begged you to look at me instead of the papers on your desk. You didn't even look up." Young's face went pale. I remember, he said. I've replayed that moment more times than you'll ever believe. Then you know, Stella said, that this isn't just about the lie someone told you. It's about the fact that when I needed you to choose me over evidence, you chose the evidence. And after that, I didn't think reaching out again would do anything except get me hurt worse. So I stopped trying. She didn't say the rest, that staying silent had also, eventually, kept her alive in a way she still hadn't told anyone the full truth about. Not even Grace knew everything. Duck Young opened his mouth and closed it again because for the first time in a long time, he understood that an apology wasn't going to be enough and he didn't have anything bigger to offer yet. I'll find the truth, he said instead. All of it. And when I do, I'm going to bring it to you myself, not send someone else to deliver it. You deserve to hear it from the person who failed to believe you the first time. Stella looked at him for a long moment. Fine, she said. Find your truth. She turned to go back inside. But don't expect me to wait around for you to feel better about yourself, she added without turning back. I've survived 5 years without you saving me. I don't need you to start now. Door closed between them, and Duck Young stood on the step a long time, staring at it, feeling something he hadn't let himself feel in years, not guilt this time. Respect Park found the thread 3 days later, buried under layers of shell accounts and outdated paperwork. Nobody had bothered updating in half a decade, because nobody thought anyone would ever look again. A single account, 4 transfers removed from anything obvious, eventually traced back to a name that made his stomach drop. Yoon Hae-jin. He sat with it for a long moment before calling Duck Young, because he knew exactly what this was going to do to him. You need to see this in person, Park said when Duck Young picked up. Just tell me, Park said. Not over the phone, trust me. When Duck Young finally saw the documents laid out across Park's desk, the forged financial records, the staged meeting photos, a witness statement from a man who had vanished the week after the divorce was finalized and never surfaced again, he didn't yell. He went very, very quiet. She's been in my house for years, he said finally, advising me. Sitting across from me at dinners, smiling at me. There's more, Park said carefully. The witness who disappeared, the money that paid him off traces to an account Hae-jin controlled through 3 different shell names. This wasn't a mistake, boss. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was built piece by piece on purpose. It wasn't really a question. It was the sound of a man trying to hold something together that had already broken. I don't know yet, Park admitted, but I intend to find out. He didn't have to wait long later that night. Alone, Duck Young went through a box he'd kept in the back of a closet for 5 years without ever opening it. He told himself, every time he saw it, that he'd get rid of it eventually. He never had. Inside, a scarf Stella used to wear. A photograph of the 2 of them on a trip neither of them had ever mentioned since. A note in her handwriting he'd never had the courage to read again after the divorce because he was afraid.